of Davidson County for review under a common law writ of certiorari, and appeal must be fulfilled within 60 days after reentry of a final decision by the board. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to assure that time and procedural requirements are met. And I do see we do have a quorum. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Those were mailed out. Are there any necessary corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
A second.
It's been properly moved and second that we approve the minutes. Is there any focused discussion? All in favor of the motion to approve the minutes, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Say no. Thank you. The motion is approved. The minutes passes. Next item on the agenda is the welcome of new board members. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Maxine Spencer, I'm assuming she's on the way, and Mr. Michael Millener to the Community Oversight Board as first-time members. We also welcome Mr. Drew Goddard and Mr. Walter Holloway as returning members. On behalf of the board and staff, we look forward to serving with you all. We will now allow two minutes each for brief introductions by the new members. We will start with Mr. Michael Millener. If you could also tell us about your background and what skills you bring to the board. Just an introduction. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if you can hear me. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I consider it a privilege to have been elected to this board. My name is Michael Millener. I'm married, father of 7. My background is as a public administrator, both by vocation and by academic training. I've worked in cities, states, and counties for about 25 years. Most of that was in contracts and procurement, dealing with terms and conditions and negotiations, as well as doing that same type of work in labor organizations. I was charter president of one of the largest labor organizations in Southern California, and then became the executive president of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. I've been here in Nashville for about 10 years and came here with the same type of fervor for community involvement that I have had all my life. And it's been a pleasure to get to know some of the people in this room through grassroots hard work and dedication towards fairness and integrity. Again, I consider it a privilege.
Yes, thank you. I just realized it went on. Thank you. And hiring procedures. Furthermore, many would say that there have been better cooperation with the COB from MMPD leadership. Yet, in my opinion, the COB still faces basic challenges for being accepted as a viable contributor to public safety in Nashville. In 1967, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a sermon. Where do we go from here? King cautioned about ending up with solutions that don't solve, answers that don't answer, and explanations that don't explain. The COB needs the resources to assist Nashville government in solving generational problems that won't just magically go away, to answer and address many of the systemic questions of the day and effectively explain, after a preponderance of the evidence, the COB findings of citizens' complaints against police officers. One of the key challenges facing the Community Oversight Board is the growing demand for COB services while continuing to operate below the national norms of Oversight Board staffing. Our current budget request provides the justification for the much-needed 9 additional positions. Among other things, the budget will allow the board to better contribute to the avoidance of city liability issues, begin to address language barriers to citizens filing complaints, put Nashville COB on par with other cities, Nashville COB budget on par with other cities, allow the COB to better contribute to public safety of all people. Still to be addressed is the accessibility of the COB to the community. Continuing to house the COB on 2nd Avenue is problematic. A community organization needs to be accessible to the people. The budget equity tool is set to integrate equity into departmental policies, practices, and program developments, and their corresponding budget needs. These are powerful words, but it needs to be followed up with action. And finally, Nashville city government can take a giant step toward demonstrating its support for the work of the Community Oversight Board with the approval of this much-needed, carefully thought out, realistic budget request. Thank you. And now we'll move on in our agenda. The next item is the nomination of officers, and that will be done by CO Legal Advisor, Attorney Daniel Oon. He will facilitate the discussion and the vote.
Hello. My colleague, Dr. Valier, is setting it up for me, so I'll kill some time. Oh, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Yes, I'm Daniel Yoon. Welcome to the new members, and good to see some of the already existing members. I won't say old members, prior existing members. I'm happy to talk about the nominations process and the vote that we will conduct in just a few minutes. First, I was going to run through the 4 officer positions, the general requirements and criteria that are to be considered. Then talk about the actual vote we will be taking and the process that we'll be using. It will be a little bit different than those of you who participated in the vote last time. And finally, talk about who has been nominated thus far and accept floor nominations for any other candidates, as well as give time for discussion for those nominees to indicate, yes, I'm willing to serve, no, I'd prefer not to, respectfully consider someone else. And here we go. So there are 4 officers that make up the executive committee of the Community Oversight Board. That is the chair, the first vice chair, the second vice chair, and the secretary. The chair presides over all the meetings. The chair is responsible for the general administration of the board's affairs, the supervision of the board's staff, that's me, and implementation of board recommendations, resolutions, and policies. The chair shall have, hold, and exercise these powers as authorized by our charter, our bylaws, and other rules that we come up with. The first vice chair fills in the absence of the chair. Resignation, removal, or disability, perform the duties and exercise the powers of the chair. Second vice chair, we got a plan B. In the absence or upon the resignation or removal of the first vice chair and chair, the second vice chair steps in. And finally, the secretary is responsible for taking, maintaining, and transmitting the official minutes of the board's meetings. But he may, and we are, delegating those tasks to a member of the board staff. The secretary also performs all of the same duties and general responsibilities as a member of the executive committee. Any questions thus far about these positions and the responsibilities therein? The executive committee is the 4 board officers and the executive director. She is a non-voting ex officio member. And the chair of the board may appoint an additional board member as a voting member of the executive committee. We have not exercised that in the past. It's just an option that we've included in our bylaws. For one reason, the executive committee of all the standing and task force committees is the only one that requires a quorum besides the general board. So 3 people have to be present. If there's 4 to choose from, that's 1 less person to risk not having a quorum. Having a 5th member appointed by the chair gives you that option to have at least 2 people out and still maintain a quorum. The executive committee main, I would say, task responsibility is they meet an additional time each month, generally the 2nd week of the month. Relevant candidate criteria is 1, interest in serving, 2, attendance at past board meetings and functions, 3, participation in the mission of the board, and 4, responsiveness to the MNCO staff. So the next step will be outlining how the vote will be conducted and reading the list of nominees as well as soliciting further floor nominations. Each board member gets 1 vote. As of now, there are 8 board members present, which is a quorum. A majority vote, which would be 5 of the 8, means that person will become the officer. The first person nominee to get 5 votes, we don't need to go further. Each officer is elected for 1 year from the time of the election and until their successors are reelected. Hopefully, we will have elections before the year runs out, but in the event that we do not, maybe it takes a month or 2, that person still remains in that position. If the person's time on the board expires before their term as an officer expires, which sometimes happens, then the chair can appoint a new board member to fill that seat and vacancy until such time as a full election can be done. If an officer is and the replacement term is what this is considered. That replacement period doesn't count towards the 2 full-term limitation. No person can stay in the same officer position for more than 2 full terms. In the event there's only 1 nominee, a voice vote will be taken and the ayes will have it. Each board member may vote aye, nay, or abstain. If the nominee fails to obtain a majority of ayes, then nominations and discussion will reopen, or board members will be named 1 by 1. You don't have to be nominated to become an officer until a majority vote is reached and a chair is selected. If there is more than 1 nominee, a roll call vote will be taken with each board member saying the name of the nominee they are voting yes for. The first candidate who receives 5 votes will be elected to that position. If there is more than 1 nominee and no one gets a majority of 5, then the nominee or nominees with the fewest number of votes will be removed and a second roll call vote will be taken. So for example, 3 votes, 2 votes, 1 vote. Nobody received a majority of 5. So the two people with votes, with the fewest number of votes, they will be removed, and another vote will be taken with just the two nominees. It's a little complicated. Any questions about that process or about anything else that's been discussed or things that might have occurred to you? All right. Then I will read through the names of the people who have been nominated. We have for chair, Arnold Hayes. There was another nominee. That person respectfully declined, citing a custom and tradition that the chair position has been, since its beginning, held by a community group nominated board member, as opposed to a member of the board who has either been nominated by council or appointed by the mayor. All of you have been nominated or selected by council, but some of you have been initially nominated by either the mayor, the council, or a community group. For first chair nominations, Arnold Hayes, Phyllis Hildreth, and Mark Wynn. All three have expressed an interest and willingness to serve if elected. For second vice chair nominations, these are the nominees. Not everyone has responded whether they wish to remain willing and interested. So during the discussion portion and during the other nominations, people can indicate whether they want to or not. Hamid Abdullah, Andrew Goddard, Arnold Hayes, Phyllis Hildreth, Walter Holloway, Michaela McCree, Sean Witzel, and Mark Wynn. And finally, for secretary nominations, Andrew Goddard, Michaela McCree, and Michael Millener. So at this time, we can open it up for discussion by any board member, whether you've been named or not, to either self-nominate, nominate additional people for any of these positions, or if you have been nominated, you can indicate whether you are willing to serve, interested, or not.
Mr. Chair? I'm sorry.
I was waiting for Mr. Hayes.
Okay.
But actually, since
I'm willing to serve.
Okay. Mr. Hayes is willing to serve. And Mr. Goddard? All right, thank you, Mr. Goddard. He's indicated he's willing to serve, and as of the two positions he's been nominated for, a preference for the position he currently holds as secretary. And for the newer members, if you wish to speak, what we generally do is turn the name placard to indicate you want to be called upon, and then when called upon, you can speak and press the microphone yes.
Yes, I appreciate the nomination, but I respectfully decline.
Thank you, Mr. Millener. Mr. Holloway? All right, thank you, Mr. Holloway.
I would accept the nominations for both positions.
All right, thank you, Ms. McCree. You've been nominated for both second vice chair and secretary. All right. I'm sorry, Mr. Abdullah?
Ms. Hildreth.
Oh, Ms. Hildreth, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I will accept the nomination for, was it first vice chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And Mr. Witzel?
Okay. I'll accept the nomination for second vice chair.
Thank you. And Mr. Abdullah, I'm going to just call you out. Do you wish to be considered for the second vice chair nomination?
I'll accept
All
the
right,
nomination for second vice chair.
Thank you, Mr. Abdullah. And you don't have to collect these in memory. I will be announcing them again when we go through the roll call vote. So starting with the chair nomination, there is one nominee, Mr. Arnold Hayes. What we can do is go through a roll call vote, and once we reach five, if we reach five, Mr. Hayes will be selected for chair. In the event that we don't have a majority of 5 aye votes, we'll go back to the drawing board. And there are measures at which I am willing to take in order to get a chair, so don't make me do it. So I'll start with Mr. Holloway. If you want to vote aye, nay, or abstain from Arnold Hayes as chair of the executive committee. Aye. Ms. McCree? Aye. Mr. Goddard?
Aye.
Mr. Witzel votes aye.
Aye.
Mr. Hayes votes aye.
Aye.
Ms. Hildreth votes aye. Mr. Abdullah votes aye.
Aye.
Ms. Spencer votes aye.
Aye.
Mr. Millener votes aye. We didn't need a unanimous vote, but we got one anyway. Congratulations, Mr. Hayes. Moving right along to first vice chair, we have 2 nominees, Phyllis Hildreth and Mark Wynn. Any focused discussion before commencing a vote? This will be a vote where, after calling your name, you can indicate whether you vote Phyllis Hildreth or Mark Wynn, or abstain. And again, first to 5 will become the officer of first vice chair. Mr. Holloway? Okay. Ms. McCree? Mr. Goddard? Mr. Witzel?
Ms. Hildreth?
Mr. Hayes?
Dr. Hilder.
And we have reached 5, and so I'll stop the call at this time, and congratulations to Ms. Hildreth as first vice chair. For second vice chair, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 nominees. So we may have that situation where we don't have a majority vote, but if you do want to write them down, it is Hamid Abdullah, Andrew Goddard, Walter Holloway, Michaela McCree, Sean Witzel, and Mark Wynn. So we'll start again, and I'm going to switch it up to Mr. Millener to start first, and we can go through. Just state the name of the person you're indicating you wish to be second vice chair.
Abstain.
Okay. Ms. Spencer?
Michaela McCree.
Mr. Abdullah?
I'm going to go with Mr. Holloway.
Ms. Hildreth?
Ms. McCree.
Mr. Hayes?
Abstain.
Mr. Witzel?
Mr. Witzel.
Mr. Goddard?
Mr. Witzel.
Ms. McCree? And Mr. Holloway? Okay. All right. I'm going to ask the board members to make sure that my math is correct. I do have 2 abstentions, 2 votes for Mr. Holloway, 2 votes for Ms. McCree, and 3 votes for Mr. Witzel. So we will go to a second vote since no one received a majority of 5. The individuals who didn't receive any votes or 1 vote will be removed. And that will leave 3 individuals, Mr. Holloway, Ms. McCree, and Mr. Witzel. So we'll do another roll call vote. You have 3 options: Walter Holloway, Michaela McCree, and Sean Witzel. And we'll start with Mr. Holloway.
Witzel.
Abstain.
Mr. Witzel.
Mr. Witzel.
Abstain.
Abstain.
All right, we do have a 5-vote majority for Mr. Sean Witzel, and he will be our second vice chair. And our last nominee or officer position is secretary. At this time, we have two nominees, Andrew Goddard and Michaela McCree. We'll do a roll call vote, and you'll just name one of those two individuals if that is your yes vote. And we'll start with Mr. Millener.
Mr. Goddard.
Ms. McCree.
Ms. McCree.
Mr. Goddard.
Abstain. Abstain.
Ms. McCree?
That is a 5-vote majority for Michaela McCree, so she is our new secretary. And those are our officers. And I will respectfully turn it back over to the chair.
Okay, congratulations. I say congratulations to all the new officers. I look forward to attempting to chair the Community Oversight Board. Thank you. Okay. Okay. All righty. I do want to mention a point of order. It was some discussion about this room versus the other room, so we do need to be out of this room by 5:30. So there may be some items that we may need to table, but we will plan accordingly on that. So now the next item is on the agenda is the director's report. And Executive Director Jill Fitchard will present her report at this time.
Good afternoon. Since we have to be out at 5:30, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this report. I gave it to you in advance, and so I'm just going to really just focus on the most important parts of the report. So we have a personnel update. Dr. Peter Valier will resign on March the 1st to take a position as the Director of Analytics for the Albuquerque, New Mexico Police Department. We also hired an administrative assistant. She will begin employment on January the 28th. And we're still working to fulfill the community liaison position, as well as a few other positions that hopefully we'll have those filled before April, or by April. We had an executive committee meeting on February the 10th. We've attended some community outreach. I shared information with the Community Changers Deep Dish Conversations, as well as a 3-year update with the IMF, the Interdenominational Ministers Fellowship. We continue to work on our complaint process. We had 2 investigative complaints since our last board meeting in December. We had 5 non-complaint calls for service. And we've had a few more since we completed this report. So complaints are coming in. And so I also we'll talk a little bit about why we need more investigators, because complaints keep increasing. There was a police shooting that happened on January the 28th, and I also sent out a media release for that, and that information is included here. So I received the notification of a police officer involved shooting on January the 27th, 2022 at 2:31 p.m. I received that call from Commander Carlos Lara, who is here with us today. He gave me a preliminary update on the circumstances. I responded to the scene. I was briefed by Commander Lara and Captain Brian Anderson of the CID division. They released detailed information about the incident to me. Investigator April Williams showed up on the scene as well. The TBI was there. The Tennessee Highway Patrol was also on the scene. Myself and another investigator went to view the body-worn camera footage the next morning, and we were able to review multiple cameras from different angles of the incident. I also received a video recording from someone in the public as well. And so I reviewed all of those, and many members of the public, some who witnessed and recorded this tragedy, called to express their outrage. I know that Chief John Drake placed the 6 involved officers on administrative leave and decommissioned 1 officer who fired the last 2 shots from his rifle. The NAACP held a press conference with the family and their legal counsel. Our office will investigate that as soon as we can get the information from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and then we'll ask that the District Attorney's Office release those records to us to complete our investigation. I wanted to talk a little bit, I know we're short on time, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the police response, the chief's response to the PRRs. He responded to MNCO complaint CC 2020-13, and he said, as to the board's finding that the charges against Officer Lawson and Sergeant Brown should be not sustained, I concur that there were no violations of departmental policy. However, I conclude that the findings should be exonerated on the charges of obstruction of rights, vehicle blocking, and self-identification instead of not sustained. I concur that the courtesy charges should not be sustained. In MNCO CC 2020-14, he says, unfortunately, at the time of the stop and vehicle block, there was no vehicle description available of the vehicle occupied by the juvenile escapee. The reasonableness of the actions of Captain Whited and the other officers involved must be judged by the information known or available to him at the time. Based on the information known to the captain at the time, reasonable suspicion existed indicating the occupant of that vehicle had committed a crime of violence, and there was a possibility the vehicle would be used to flee. Due to these facts, I reject the finding against the captain and find that it should be exonerated. If you read the report when we presented it, it was very clear in that report that the vehicle that they were looking for was a silver vehicle. They mentioned that multiple times on the CAD report. The occupants whose vehicle was blocked in or jammed was a black Jeep. And so I don't necessarily agree with this. I'm going to let you all decide how you want to respond to that. And do you want to talk about that now, or do you want to wait till after I finish? I can go through this and we can wait till afterwards.
I'd like to respond.
Okay, go ahead, sure.
As a new board member, I trust that you will forgive me if I retread ground that I know that you guys have already been over. But if, in fact, the response from MNPD to the PRR is in the opinion of a board member either non-responsive or it's not supported by the arguments made or the evidence that is included in that response, is there an opportunity for the record for this board to place a document in rebuttal or have some kind of a point of, I won't say appeal, but definitely objection to that response? If so, my point is that I do disagree with the conclusions reached by MNPD in this particular case, and I find that the arguments made were, number one, not substantive or did not really coincide with the code violations that were stated.
Yeah, so you'll have to fix it up there. I'm sorry. I did it too many times. Just for reference, when you use this mic, hit it very.
Let's see. He said mute all. It's not working. Well, the single point lesson said to just do mute all, and it's not working. Can we get the technician back? Okay. Now it stopped. Okay. Nope. Okay.
And so what I would say is, if that's something that the board would like to do collectively, it'd have to be a vote on whether or not they want to respond to that, and kind of just lay out the reasoning based on what's in the investigative report on why his response was this way. You want to mention something?
Yes, I would say that the charter obviously authorizes this board to do certain things. The memorandum of understanding, some of the bylaws and rules, they all emanate from that sort of superseding document. So what it authorizes you to do is to make recommendations, issue policy, advisory, and resolution reports to agencies involved in public safety and the administration of justice. Certainly in our MOU and our standard practices, we have chosen and elected that the way we do this is to assess policy violations, send that to the OPA and the chief of police for a written response within 45 days. But that's just one interpretation of what that larger vision and mission and scope allows for. So I certainly am I like to be creative and I like to be useful to the board. So to the extent that other options and other potential ways to carry out the vision and mission of this board can be completed and accomplished in ways that aren't enumerated in our documents, we can change them. They can be modified, such as the example that Mr. Millener produced, putting something in the file ourselves as opposed to asking the chief to put the file or take a certain action.
Okay, just a check. Can you hear me on the mic now? So it seems like they're back working now. So if you could go ahead and finish your report, and then we'll go to focused discussion.
All right, so there was a force review board that was scheduled on Thursday, February the 10th, in regards to a police shooting that ended in a fatality. That was postponed until March, and that date hasn't been determined. We're in budget season, and so we will talk about that shortly. I did want to mention that the CPA will host their 12-week training session beginning on Monday, February the 28th. I implore anyone who hasn't taken it from this last round that you have to take it within your first year. It is something that the legislator has requested that we do, and so if you are out of compliance, I need you to contact me so that you can get in compliance. If you're new to the board, you have to take that CPA training within 12 months. So you have the option, February 28th is next Monday. You can't do that, obviously. And then the next one will be in September, okay? And so if you haven't taken it, you can't take it in February, then you have to take it in September, or you will be out of compliance, which puts the board at jeopardy, okay? License plate readers, so there was an amendment to the bill. It's BL 2022-1116. It's an ordinance amending section 13.08.080 of the codes and laws pertaining to the use of license plate scanner technology to ensure data access parity for the Community Oversight Board. The bill sponsor would like any updates or suggestions before the second reading of the bill, which is set for March the 1st. And so that bill is to really give us access. It changed the language it's amending the language that was in the bill that Councilmember Johnston proposed, and it was accepted. And what they're saying is they took out the Community Oversight Board the Community Oversight Board chair, and put in the executive director or its designee, which I think was really good, which was in Rosenberg's bill in the first place, but is language that we need in there so that we will be able to do those audits the way that hopefully we can get those done. Myself and the research analyst Gavin Williams attended the stakeholders committee meeting for the Partners in Care pilot for the mental health co-response model with MMPD and Mental Health Co-op. That happened on February the 3rd. We will have a department head meeting on Thursday, February the 24th, and that's with all the elected officials and department heads for Metro government. Myself and Dr. Valier will do a presentation to the recruit training class 95 on tomorrow morning. And I just wanted to close with the opportunity to pursue why it's important that we have survivor resources and a social worker is to continue to pursue opportunities for complainants in the family of deceased individuals who have been directly impacted by police violence and shooting deaths. And I believe the addition of a social worker to the MNCO staff would assist complainants by triaging their needs during the intake process. Nashville, with this, can be an example for best practices and on the forefront of police reform by addressing the social, emotional, and mental needs of our complainants during the misconduct investigation process. That's not something that is happening in other agencies across the country. And it's not like it's cutting edge, but it is addressing the need that I think that the people who come to us who have experienced harm need. So, and that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, Executive Director Pritchard. Are there any questions or comments on the Executive Director's report? Okay. Mr. Goddard.
With respect to the finding that was discussed earlier, I would suggest, and I'll make a motion if there's support for it, I would suggest a letter to Chief Drake expressing concern that his finding was that there was reasonable suspicion for any police action at that point. And if the car was identified as silver, it was identified as sedan, was that right? And instead a black Jeep is pulled over, ask specifically what range of vehicles qualifies for reasonable suspicion if a different color and a different type of vehicle is sufficient suspicion. It really looks like to me, he's basically saying they could have stopped any car in Nashville.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Millener.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I'll get used to it. A second. I think that was a form of a motion.
That's it, Mr. Millener. I recognize you.
Second.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay. All right. It's been properly moved and second that as far as a letter to Chief Drake on that particular subject, which is concerning his letter. All in favor? No, I'm sorry. I got to get used to this too. Okay, is there any discussion? It's been properly moved and second. Is there any discussion on? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. No. Thank you. All right. Any other further discussion? Okay. The next item then on the agenda is, and these two items for discussion, these two may require a vote. The first one will be the COB annual MNCO budget request. And again, that's Director Pritchard will lead that discussion.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to, Dr. Valier helped with this process, and so I asked him to help with this response to the board because this budget is super important to us. So the budget season happened, that we did have of course, I didn't present this to the board before I submitted it, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Was in our rules. I did not do that because there were two reasons. I didn't realize that we had such a short period of time to get this into Metro government. It was a very short period in turnaround time between the time that we met with the budget committee and then the time that it was supposed to be sent in. And so that's why we're presenting it to you today after it's already been submitted to Metro government. There is this opportunity for us to discuss it, vote on it. If you want to make changes to it, we can do that because my meeting isn't until March the 23rd with the budget committee. And so we can, at that moment, you know, if there's any changes to it, address it then. All right, so it wasn't like the final budget, but they did have a deadline date of Friday, February the 14th. Is that Friday, February the 14th? Yes. So anyway, what we did was when we were working on this budget, we began to sit down to see how our office, oh, we can't put it up there. You have it in front of you. We created a new proposed organizational chart. We built the budget based on this organizational chart to build out our department. After 3 years of serving in this role, 2.5 years serving in this role, I realized where we had areas that needed improvement. Number one, we need more staff. I mean, that's just generally understood by everyone, that we are lacking investigators, which is, and really, we're not able to move as quickly as we want to on these reports, and we're not even able to meet our own deadlines on this particular area. And so at the time when we first started, we only had really 2 management roles in the office, myself and the assistant director. And so we also begin to notice that we have a need for some mid-level management positions to grow out the department. And so what we're asking for in this budget is a special assistant to the director, as well as an administrative service manager. And that will help with being able to manage the department. But as we began to create this budget, we looked at how many investigators we needed in comparison to what was happening across the country. I included that information with the information that I submitted to you, and it was included in the document. And so it's been a long road to figure out where we are lacking in. Number one, our core mission is to service the community taking complaints. We know that we needed to have more investigators. We know that we also need a social worker, right? But then, of course, if we get more people in, somebody has to manage them. And so at that point, we noticed that, okay, the legal advisor is handling, the work of the PRRs, but he can't do them all. If we get 5 investigators, we're going to need some more legal assistance as well. And so this budget is based on a need that we studied, that we included the information that you needed. And then I think what's important is Nashville's return on the investment. And if you read that on page 2, it says an additional investment in COB would benefit Nashville in multiple ways. First, one of the goals of the civilian oversight is to create an environment where community trust can be built with the police and the government. A better resource COB would allow for the staff to efficiently complete their duties and conduct more community outreach. Second, civilian oversight addresses systematic policy and procedure deficiencies in the police department that expose the city to liability. An effective, well-staffed oversight office will build capacity to systematically identify policies and procedures that may cause avoidable harms. So in this year's budget, we're requesting 2 investigators in fiscal year 23, 2 in fiscal year 24. I'm not going to go through, because of time, going through every equity impact. We need a legal assistant. We're asking for a professional specialist. The professional specialist would be tasked with handling all of the audits and monitorings of body-worn camera footage, body-worn cameras, in-car cameras, as well as license plate readers. Where, the council has included that we be involved in that process. So then we need to be able to deliver on that, right? So we have to have that position in order to be able to do that work. We've asked for a social work senior. We asked for a public information coordinator. In that position, what we did was we had all of that information for the public information coordinator kind of built into the community liaison position. And so what we did was we separated the 2 because we were asking a whole lot from a community liaison, right, to be all of these things and not really being able to pay them for all of those duties. And so we felt it would be better for our department to have 2 separate positions in that way. And then we're asking for myself to have an executive assistant. Right now we have 1 administrative assistant, and that person is really tasked with all the duties of the office, to pay up the bills, to make sure the timekeeping, to make all the orderings, procurement, and all of that. And that is, I think, slightly different than an executive assistant to help me with the work that I have to do. And then a special assistant to the director is a position, and if you look at the chart, the flow chart, the organizational chart, that would be a mid-level management position that would handle and supervise the research, policy, and audit staff members. And then the administrative service manager would be focusing on our coordinating for the community-focused and administrative task in our office. You want to add something, Dr. Valier?
So this budget was really focused on how do we build out core services, and then how do you build out the management of the different functions of the office. So focusing on investigations as the priority, as the core service of our office, and then focused on how do we best manage the other functions as research and community outreach, and having those as functions of the office that have management and leadership, and so those can grow and develop.
And this year, they included something new from the Chief Diversity Officer's office they created this budget equity tool that went along. And so so that you have some idea what I'm talking about, the mayor has named equity for this particular budget. Like, this budget is based on equity. And so there was this new formula that they wanted. And so the budget equity tool, what it requested was that for each strategy, for everything that we wanted, we had to look at it through this equity lens and how it affected our budget. And so I included all that. Dr. Valier worked really hard on that as well. And it just talked about our services and why those services are needed. And then also it has that equity lens on there. And so when you look at that, that is a part of the strategy for the mayor's office, and they requested that. And so, yeah, that's it for me. That's all I have on that.
Okay, are there any questions or comments on Director Fisher's report? Dr. Hilder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Fisher, for that report. I would like to make a comment and then a couple of observations. The first is I want to extend an apology to this board. I was designated to be the chair of the Budget Committee that we created for the first time. Even though we're moving into our third full year, we have never really engaged in government budgeting in the time we've been here. You know, we spent our first time just growing up and trying to go into the $1 million that was reserved for us as we created and filled positions, and then we began our work. And what we found is our work had dimensions beyond anything, I believe, that the founders expected, certainly that the founding board members experienced in the first 2 years. And we could not anticipate that there would be new work that was created by law and technology. Electronic supervision of evidence and data. Body-worn cameras did not exist in this jurisdiction at the time that the people voted to pass Amendment 1 with a budgetary set-aside. LPRs did not exist in this jurisdiction at that time. And if we properly ask for and receive a seat at the table to do that work, then there have to be staff members available to look at that. So we knew the work was expanding, and when we formed the Budget Committee to assist the Executive Director, I'm going to be honest, I was focusing on the quantum and the quality of the work and figuring out how we identified the financial costs for that work and begin to build models, index models. Is there a national standard for indexing? Is there some kind of tool we can use in this community so we're not always begging for bread, but if the police department is funded at X, then we need to be funded at Y? As your chair for that subcommittee, that was my sole focus. I completely blew the fact that maybe I ought to reread the bylaws again to find out what our work was. I own that error. In that committee, we did not look at the bylaws. We did not talk about the bylaws. We were so carefully attuned to the other timeline of the process that the executive director actually brought before us in a prior meeting. Remember, that was a beautiful little schematic, and it had all those important dates? We had our eyes on that, and we kind of weren't looking at our P's and Q's. So that is why the executive director and her staff found themselves in a position where they were out of sync with the Budget Committee that met before the last general meeting. We didn't raise it the last general meeting, and she was caught between the Executive Committee and an immutable deadline with the Budget Office. So I apologize for that confusion. In order to keep that from happening again, and also to continue the processes that we have started here, and Attorney Yoon's been very good with this, as we have standard trainings, Attorney Yoon, periodic re-ups on the bylaws, and particularly those operative parts that guide our work, is going to be useful. But that's an explanation, not an excuse. And I apologize to you and to the members of the community who have entrusted us to do this properly and well. That's my mea culpa. Now, in terms of supporting the budget and the process we talk about, I want to focus on two things. First, the equity impact. Want to applaud the mayor's administration for ensuring that their fiscal process holds all departments accountable to looking at the equitable impact of any budget. So we have discussed, and we need to reiterate here, that one of the equitable impacts that we need to attend to and guard vigilantly is the budget parity with the driving entity that causes us to be in the being. And that is oversight of policing. Therefore, if policing as a thing that has a scope and size and cost, then our scope and size and cost must keep pace with it. Now, it's also important to look for a national standard, and Director Fitchard, am I correct that you did identify a national standard in NACOL? Is that correct?
That's correct. An indexed budget requirement is becoming more common with Miami, Chicago, New York City, and Rochester, New York, all recently requiring that civilian oversight receive more than 1% of the police budget.
1%. So I'm understanding that the national standard is a community oversight entity should receive 1 penny on every dollar that's spent on policing. Amen?
Amen.
All we want is a penny. For every policing dollar that crosses the public budget in this jurisdiction, we're asking for 1 penny on each of those dollars. And that's an index penny. So if this jurisdiction and the people that compose it decide to start spending less on policing, we will happily take a reduction in our annual budget. We simply want parity. So as we look at the proportionality, we look at the expansion of work, the different kinds of work, and the way that we depend on staff to do their work so that when we come here on the fourth Wednesday, we can do ours within the time limit. We have to have parity and a robust infrastructure. So for that reason, I want to commend staff and leadership for doing the research to find the rationale, for checking and really being careful about the work we do, for making that available and transparent to us and to the people we serve. So thank you, and I will end my remarks saying that I'm fully in support of this budget request as it has gone in. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I do want to add that I really am very reluctant to accept that apology from Dr. Hilder. I don't think it was anything to apologize for. I think the board did great work on getting this board launched, and you were just going through trial and error. So I don't think it's anything to apologize for. Okay, Mr. Holloway?
All right, thank you. Those are two different positions, and, you know, if you try to combine them, then what you're doing is you're going to have more staff with one particular management position, and what we're trying to do is to separate those out so that there is some growth potential, professional growth potential in our office. And then number two, a social worker, when the people come to us for services, which is what I've been talking about for the last 6 months, is that they're not looking to go somewhere else. They're looking for answers for us because they're coming to us with their complaints of whatever police harm that they've experienced. So I think that a social worker is super important to our office. And then on another note, when Dr. Hilder mentioned index budgeting, from fiscal year 20 to 22, MNPD's budget grew nearly 12%, while the COB's budget grew under 2%. And so I just want that to stick in your mind as you're thinking about voting for this budget.
I'm not saying that you're wrong, but I'm just saying they nitpick little stuff, you know, when you submit your budget, you know, so you're hoping that what you need, you hope that you'll get it, but they'll see whatever they can do, whatever they can get by with. And that's
Ms. Spencer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I look over this proposed structure, I think about what the mayor's administration is saying around an equity lens. And I think there's equity when it comes to pay and when it comes to the financials of it and also to the workload. And to what you have been talking about, Director, I think from what you're voicing, it feels very much in line with an equity lens of what I would understand to be an equity lens. And especially, I think the social worker position is incredibly important. I think for all the trauma that some people have come through and to be able to even stand up and say, you know, I want something done, you know, to even make a complaint, it takes a strong amount of courage and emotional power to be able to actually get to that point. And so I think the least that we could do as a body is have a social worker, someone that's ready to basically be able to help them process and help address what's going on for them in the here and now. And so I find that it would be very much almost not necessarily going in line with an equity lens to not necessarily have this. I feel like this is really bare bones as it is already. I feel like if we had the money, that we could do even more. I would suggest even more social workers. I would suggest even more positions to help with the executive function of the office. So that's it.
Okay, and I don't want to rush the vote or anything, but I will entertain a motion to approve the budget.
Well, I make a motion to approve the budget as is.
Is there a second?
I second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we approve the MNCO budget request. Is there any focused discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Opposed? Say no. Any abstentions? The budget passes. Our budget recommendation passes. And now we need to do a time check. We're about 10 minutes after 5, and we're saying we have to be out at 5:30. And I do want to say it's disappointing. My understanding is that the room was reserved with clarity, and we've used this room for quite some time, for quite a few meetings, and it's disturbing to have to leave the meeting early, but we will do that accordingly. One thing that I would suggest is the proposed resolution reports, that if we can have another meeting where we can probably go over those. That's just one suggestion. We can have some discussion on that. But I do think we can go on to the license plate readers. I do believe we have time. We do have time for that. So if Dr. Belier Mr. Carl Williamson, if you can go ahead. The next item would be the license plate readers.
All right, thank you. And this is I think can be a relatively quick item. Councilmember Bob Mendez reached out to Director Fitchard to inform her that he has developed ordinances that would modify the recently passed license plate reader legislation in order to make the Community Oversight Board have a more functional role in oversight of license plate readers. The Executive Committee asked that we review the proposed ordinance and provide any recommendations to the board of whether or not this would be good for the board's position of oversight of license plate readers. Mr. Crowell Williamson and I reviewed the ordinances. The major change is that it would put the Community Oversight Board on a parity level with the District Attorney's Office and Public Defender's Office, and allow the Executive Director or a designee to audit any aspect of the license plate reader or equipments, and also have the Executive Director be able to appoint somebody to view the audit logs. And that's in contrast to the current ordinance or the current code as it stands, which does not have parity for the Community Oversight Board. We did not identify any additional areas that really should be focused on, but we felt that this language would be helpful for the board as to provide oversight, and our recommendation would be that if the board chooses to endorse this language, that the board could vote to endorse it, and that we could inform the council that the board has endorsed this particular ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Thank both of you, Dr. Valier and Mr. Carl Williamson. Is there any questions or comments on their report of the research team? Okay, hearing none, I will entertain a motion to that effect.
I motion to adopt the language.
It's been properly moved and seconded that the license plate reader recommendations by the research team. Is there any focused discussion?
Point of notice, this is not recommendations from the research team. This is an endorsement of BL 2022-1116, just as a point of clarification.
Thank you for that point of order. Okay. All right. Okay, I do want to make sure we capture that correctly, though, in the minutes. Can you restate that, Ms. Miller?
Sure. This is a potential endorsement of BL 2022-1116, an ordinance that will be on second reading to the Metropolitan Council next Tuesday.
Okay. Ms. McCree?
By approving or endorsing the language, would that effectively override the positions of the board that we have previously taken?
No, this would not affect any sort of previous positions. This is specific. This would allow us as staff to advocate for the position of the board, that this would be a beneficial change to the code. It's a little, as the staff, we represent the official positions of the board when advocating to the council or other elected leaders. And so this would endorse for us that this is something that we would communicate to the council that the board is in support of. At least that would be my interpretation. If anyone has a different interpretation, I would also entertain that.
No, thank you for that clarification. I just wanted to make sure I know as a board we made a clear vote and statement that as a board we were not in support of the license plate readers, but since the bill has passed, I wanted to make sure that that still was the case, that the board as a whole does not necessarily support them, but given the fact that they will be here and on the streets in the in the trial, that we have the ability to be a part of that process. And so just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that.
And I do want to apologize, Mr. Goddard, you were next, and I went ahead.
I'm not, as long as you let me talk at some point, I'm not the least bit worried about the order.
Thank you.
My question, did staff propose any of this language, or is this all from?
This came from Councilmember Mendez.
Okay. And I will just note, it's not clear to me, I guess I'm throwing a ball to Mr. Ewan for later discussion, just note at the moment. It's not at all clear to me under state law that we have this authority, but I'm not prepared to vote no based on that at the moment, just a question I have. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we were saying that this is an endorsement of BL 2022-1116. That's what's being asked. The board is endorsing BL 2022-1116.
Yes.
Okay. Then I will entertain a motion. Or we already had a motion for that. So if that motion, can you restate the motion? It's BL 22-1116, endorsing BL.
I motion that we endorse the language of BL 2022-1116.
I second that motion.
It's been properly moved and seconded that that this board endorses council ordinance BL 2022-1116. Is there any further discussion? Hear none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. It passes. Okay, now again with the time check. So we're really getting close now. So I do want to, if we can have some discussion about whether we can have an additional board meeting or, excuse me.
Mr. Chair, just to point out, we do have the option of reconvening in the next room over. It's not required. You can certainly adjourn early if you wish, but the board has the option of continuing the meeting just in a separate venue.
Okay, I'd like to get some opinions on that, on our options.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would be in favor of that. I think it's very important that we go forward with the PRRs today. We know that there has been tremendous concern in the community that can't always be judged by the number of persons you see in this room, but this is a matter of some urgency, and I think we have a responsibility to go forward on this day.
Anyone else?
I don't believe a vote's necessary. This would just be a temporary recess and so we're not formally adjourning and reopening the agenda. We are simply continuing it in a separate room. So it's about 5:20.
Okay. All right, we will reconvene in the other room there. And this is my first time as chair, and boy, you all threw a lot of things at me. Reconvene. Before Attorney Yoon starts his report, I wanted to give Ms. Spencer an opportunity to introduce herself and just tell us about some of your background and the skills that you bring to the board. Basically 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. My name, again, is Maxine Spencer. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and they, them, theirs. And I am currently a labor organizer, specifically organizing Black workers in the city. Where I get a lot of my skill set from around like trying to achieve group consensus, I think around trying to look more into how people develop like their own interpersonal relationships. A lot of that comes from my founding work. I kind of I'm a little iffy on it, on how I like to define it. But as a student activist, founding like an affinity group over on my campus, and then going onward to be a youth worker at the Oasis Center. And so from there on, I kept developing my skills when it came to like social and interpersonal relationship, and then also taking into concern identities when it comes into that, and identity development, and how that impacts different forms of relationships, and how that impacts, how people are walking through the world, and how people are able to be in space with each other, basically. And I've continued to basically develop that, and I feel like that's one of the strengths and skills that I really bring to this board, as well as like my own perspective on what policing and safety really is. And so, thank you. Thank you for giving me this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Spencer, and welcome to the board.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
All right. And so we will go ahead and continue with the proposed resolution presentation. Attorney Yoon, you have the floor. Thank you.
This is how we receive our complaints. There's 5 different ways: anonymously, anonymously, and director initiated. We try to be as accessible as possible to folks. When we receive the complaint, an investigator is assigned, and that investigator creates an investigative file. What's different from that investigative file and the proposed resolution report you have tonight, and that's published online, and that's available to the public with redactions in it, is that the investigative report includes material that is confidential. We get a lot of materials from agencies through a memorandum of understanding, because they are also metro agencies, some of them, and they are subject to the charter amendment as well. But we have to do it under an understanding that this information is still going to be kept confidential the same way they received it, and not disseminated to the public, not disseminated to private individuals, juvenile records, criminal records, allegations, pending criminal investigations. Once we get the investigative report, the proposed resolution report is compiled, and it's going to look a little bit different. Again, this is a public-facing document that all of you can review, that, again, members of the public can look at as well. When you receive it, these are the legal standards that was chosen by the rules and process committees at the very beginning, at the outset. There's a lot of ways to do this, but this is the way that we've chosen. The board will review each proposed resolution report, applying a standard of a presumption of correctness. You've got a staff, you've got investigators, you've got the executive director, you've got myself. And we've done a lot of work in preparation for these resolution reports. So unless there is evidence in this report that is just 51%, you think it goes the other way, that presumption of correctness applies. In most situations, the board will make its decision based upon the proposed resolution report, any comments by the director, without further submission or arguments by the complainant or the accused officer employee, as each has had ample opportunity to present information throughout the process, not just during the interviews that we conduct, but following. They're encouraged to say, if there's any updates, if there's any information that you didn't include in your interview, follow up with us. A presumption of correctness, it's different than beyond a reasonable doubt. It's different than clear and convincing. It is 51%. The board is to assume all the factual conclusions in the proposed resolution report are true, unless a preponderance of the evidence to the contrary. A majority of the board must be convinced that the evidence presented in the report, it's 51% likely that the factual conclusion is not true. So it would require a vote by this board that the findings section of the PRR, y'all find it a different way. So the 4 actions that you actually take, or actually before we get there are limitations on what you can consider. Obviously, your expertise, your experiences, your entire person is meant to be a part of this board. And that being said, you're not going to do your own investigation. You're not going to rely on, well, I remember being on that street, and I think there is a stoplight at the end of that block. we're asking you not to do that because out of all fairness, the investigation that the investigator did, the sides that were presented to each, the complainant and the subject officer or officers, has been done in a certain way. If we start using a different fact finder that they've had no participation in and no ability to respond to adequately, I think it does affect fundamental fairness and due process. And that, for that reason, similarly, we encourage you and say that you can't speak to the complainants, speak to the subject officers outside of these board meetings. These are the 4 actions that you will literally be taking and voting upon. You can accept the resolution report as is, no modifications. Once a proposed resolution report is approved by the board and voted on by a majority of you, it becomes the resolution report. It's no longer a proposition. It is a resolution report. And that resolution report gets sent to the agencies of the Office of Professional Accountability in the police department and the chief of police directly. And he has 45 days to respond pursuant to the memorandum of understanding. The second thing you can do is accept but modify. So you're going to change some of the things that we put in the report, but in essence, it's going to go forward. Everyone has a clear understanding of what's going to be changed and what modification it's going to be, but there's not going to be further action taken. We don't need to come back in front of the board with those edits for approval. Rejection. I think this is sort of a misnomer. It says rejection, but what it really means is you're still accepting the report. The report's still going to get sent out from tonight's meeting. There is a conclusion, however, or a finding, or both, that you are changing. You are directly contradicting. It's sort of that unless the preponderance of the evidence is to the contrary situation, you are making a finding that is different than what was in the proposed resolution report. That is going to be the modification/edit, but it really is a rejection of the MNCO's finding or conclusion. Still, the resolution report is created after today's meeting and it gets sent to the appropriate agencies. A return is what I would think similarly colloquially as a rejection. You are actually going to send this report back to MNCO staff for further investigation. Maybe a specific ordinance needs to be looked at. Maybe a specific officer needs to be reinvestigated. Another witness needs to be examined. But for whatever reason, no resolution report is going to be accepted at today's meeting. And we will return this resolution report to you when it's ready as another proposed resolution report. Any questions about those actions or anything else that I've talked about so far? What do we do now? We're going to talk about the 2 resolution reports the director is going to present. There may be further discussion by the board or questioning of the director or myself. Just be aware, we have some rules around confidentiality that we have to maintain. We want to be transparent and accountable, and it doesn't. We are cognizant of the fact that people may be watching, and it doesn't look that great when we have to say, sorry, we can't get into that. But for that reason, we do. We encourage each of you to come to this, the office at 222 2nd Avenue and look at the investigative file, the underlying materials. Many of you have done this already. It's not the easiest thing to do. It's a very short turnaround sometimes when we get the PRRs to you for you to have time to schedule and then try to find parking downtown. But you know, it is hopeful. And we are also looking into exploring ways that you can do this from your home. We had a promising conversation with Metro Legal and ITS, and we'll be prepared to sort of present that to you when we have more specifics. But regardless of the outcome, all resolution reports that you approve will be sent to the chief of police. He'll be required to respond in writing. We have a check and balance on this process. If either the complainant or the subject officer or both disagree with the board's approved resolution reports, they can ask us to reconsider it, really only under 2 grounds. We're not going to relitigate this. We're not going to reinvestigate this for every sort of, we don't like the result. It's really going to be because there's newly discovered evidence that was material and could not have been discoverable at the time. So maybe we missed the ball somewhere, but if we exercise due diligence and it's not material, we're not going to relitigate, we're not going to reinvestigate it or reopen it. There are other remedies available to them they can pursue. It just won't be through this body. And secondarily, if there's a substantial procedural error, if we had a rule, we had a fundamental fairness procedure, and we didn't follow it, that would be a reason to reconsider and to reopen the conclusions by this board. Finally, the resolution report, after it is approved, We wait the 10 days for the petition to reconsider. We wait the 45 days for the chief to make a decision. And then the redactions that we made to people's names become published, because that information is now publicly available to them through the OPA and through the police department as well. So there's no reason for us to keep it, I guess, confidential at that time. That's our office building. That's my contact information.
Okay, thank you. This case is MNCO complaint CC 2020-025. It is a citizen referred complaint. The citizen referred complaint the MNCO received on June 24th, 2020 about an incident that occurred on June 21st, 2020. The complainant reported that 2 police cars followed him from church on Monroe Street to his home on Buchanan Street in North Nashville. Upon arriving home, while the complainant's wife went inside to change clothes, the complainant remained inside the car to feed their 1-year-old son. While doing so, one of the officers rammed his car from behind hard enough that the complainant was concerned it had been jolted out of park. The driver who rammed the complainant's car is identified as Officer 1. 2 additional officers arrived on scene, and the complainant alleges that Officer 2 was discourteous and unbecoming, while the other, Officer 3, intentionally moved Officer 1's patrol vehicle in order to evade the complainant's ability to photograph the car's bumper touching his car. We initiated an investigation into conduct unbecoming, obstruction of rights, excessive use of force, and policy related to vehicular jams against all 3 officers. During the interview of Officer 1 stated that the day prior, on June 20th, he had been involved in a separate incident that involved a white Chevy Malibu and gunshots allegedly being fired. The incident occurred in an area of Clay and 16th Avenue North, and Officer 1 saw the complainant's car on this day near DB Todd and Buchanan. Officer 1 admits he was not able to see who was inside the vehicle, nor whether the complainant or anyone else inside the car matched the physical description of the suspect from the previous day. Officer 1 further admits that the tag number relayed to dispatch from the previous day did not match the complainant's car. At the time he decided to execute a vehicular block maneuver, however, Officer 1 had not received a response from dispatch as to whether the tag number of the complainant's car matched the suspect car from the day before. He decided to ram the complainant's car anyway. Officer 1 did not communicate his intent to execute a vehicle block to either of the 2 additional officers on scene, Officer 2 and 3. He also did not call a supervisor, which policy dictated he should do. While an exception is permitted if there is not sufficient time to make a call, I note that Officer 1 initially called dispatch at 11:28 a.m., asking for the tag number from the previous day, and he is still in his patrol car waiting for a response from dispatch until at least 11:41 a.m. There appears to be ample time to call a supervisor since the complainant is parked in front of his residence, not going anywhere or doing anything. All parties agree that the officers did not have their weapons drawn. However, the complainant claims they had their hands on the butts of their pistols when they approached, and the officers did not remember if they had or when they were asked that question. Officer 1 acknowledges that he did not tell the complainant any other basis for stopping the complainant other than he believed the car was involved in a carjacking or a drive-by. He makes no mention of the window tint nor the lane change as a reason to stop the complainant's car to the complainant at the time, and no traffic ticket was issued to the complainant for either a window tint or an improper lane change. Both Officer 2 and Officer 3 specifically deny making the statements or doing the actions alleged against them by the complainant because there is no body-worn camera footage or other evidence to refute or corroborate the allegations against them are unsustained.
Based on the preponderance of evidence, I do find that the allegations of obstruction of rights, adherence to rules related to vehicular blocks, and excessive use of force against Officer 1 are sustained. Officer 1 was investigated by the Office of Professional Accountability, and they and Officer 1 agreed that he violated policy related to the vehicular blocking and received a 2-day suspension and remedial training. A finding was not made against Officer 1 related to excessive use of force or obstruction of rights. Therefore, pursuant to the Metro Legal Memo, Officer 1 may still be disciplined as it relates to those policy violations. Officer 1's disciplinary history includes a written reprimand in 2016 for a car accident, an oral reprimand in March 2017 for using profanity while handcuffing someone. In June 2017, Officer 1 initiated a felony takedown of a vehicle vaguely matching the description of a vehicle involved in a carjacking. Officer 1 handcuffed the driver and placed him in the back of his patrol car while he conducted a warrantless and non-consensual search of the person's car. Officer 1 received a written reprimand for this incident. He also received a 4-day suspension in 2019 for abusive treatment, a Category C offense for placing someone on their stomach and sitting on them as a method of maintaining their compliance. And so I said all those things just to give you a background as we move into the discipline for this officer. Obstruction of rights is a Category B offense. A first offense is generally disciplined between 8 and 13 days of suspension. I recommended a 10-day suspension based on the severity of the offense, the presence of the 2 other individuals, which is the complainant's wife and the 1-year-old child, and the similarity of this offense to his previous disciplinary history for which he received a written reprimand. Excessive use of force can be disciplined up to a Category A offense, depending on the severity of the incident. In this instance, the executive director recommends a Category B offense and a 10-day suspension for a total recommended discipline of 20 days. I also want to note that during Officer 1's interview with the investigator, he made statements to the effect that the complainant had acted squirrely and was acting suspicious after noticing that the officer was behind the complainant. And I am concerned about that as the drivers who live off in North Nashville were concerned about how the officer was treating them and also felt like they were being profiled. So I think that, so my recommendation is for a 20-day suspension, but I do think there should be a discussion in regards to diversity training or some type of cultural competency training. I don't know how Metro offers that, but I do know that they have something called a mobile diversity. So that, I will conclude on that and take your questions now.
Thank you, Director Fitcher. And are there any questions or comments for Director Fitcher?
Yes.
Mr. Holloway.
It is, looking at his record, it's kind of like a track record that is just waiting for a bomb to go off eventually. They have not really dealt with him like they should have. And apparently, the incident that he's been involved in, hadn't been corrected. And that's why he's involved in a situation now. And my major concern, them bumping the car and you got a small child in that car. Now, how can we turn our back on something like that? This child is innocent, regardless if the guy was the suspect. But this child is innocent. And he's talking about he's waiting on the dispatcher to report back him the listing of the car. And I'm under the impression his car probably should have had a computer in there and where he could run that tag himself and it to come back. And what happens a lot of time over aggressive policing, you get involved in a situation and you respond and hoping that you make the right decision. And if you make the wrong decision, then you got to make the story fit the incident. And we can't let this pass by. We can't let this slide. We got to do something with this.
and correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say I heard that the plates or the car didn't match the description that was originally given. Was that the case?
Yeah, that's correct. It says, where is it? What he gave, it did not match. That's correct.
Okay, and the reason I say that is because it seemed like this is like the theme that we've been hearing over and over and over again. And so if that's the case, if you know, I'm looking for a African-American man and I go pull over Mr. Goddard, then this is a problem. And then when you consider the fact that he has such a lengthy disciplinary history, I'm with Officer Holloway. This is something that really need to be addressed.
Mr. Carter?
I want to clarify, my understanding, and I'm just clarifying, I don't disagree with the recommendation. My understanding was at the time he took these actions, he did not know the plates didn't match. He didn't have the number from his call a few days earlier to match the plate in front of him.
That's correct. It was the day before.
Yeah, day before, whatever
Yes.
it was, but he
Right.
was wrong, no question, and he didn't know one way or the other, and the actions are wrong. The 2-day suspension, is that final? Drake signed off, Chief Drake has signed off on that?
Yes.
Do we know? Okay.
That's correct.
So here we would be saying there are additional violations that Chief Drake has not looked at, and that's why we have jurisdiction to make these additional recommendations. Is that right?
That's correct, because
Okay,
we
good,
sustained that the 2 days was, you know.
Good. That's what I
yes,
thought. I just wanted to be clear.
That's
where
correct.
we were. Okay, thank you.
And what I would like for you to do, in the proposed resolution report that I sent to you, if you look at what his remedial training written report stated, he says, with respect to my vehicle block on June 21st, 2020, he learned several things. He says, with the benefit of distance and thoughtful reflection, one of the more important things I've realized is that time was on my side that day and I should have slowed things down. And what he's talking about is an incident that's similar to this, you know, a year before. And so he says that I should ask myself some questions. You know, if I was operating under fresh or dynamic factors, I recognize and acknowledge I had other options available to me that day. If I could do it all over again, I would ask myself, does this have to happen now? Does any type of exigency exist? Can I follow and observe? And so I think that if he said that a year before, and it's the same type of case, then I think that the discipline that we're recommending, and it really could be more than that, but I think that it is, you know, in my opinion, if he's already been reprimanded for that, and he wrote this remedial statement, and he had time to reflect, I'm concerned that he didn't do that.
I think we got the dates wrong there. His statement starts with referring to a June 21, 2020 incident, and that is the one that's the subject of this report.
You're right.
Okay.
That's correct. He wrote the report on September 28, 2020 in regards to this particular instance right here.
Okay, Ms. McCree?
My comment or question was in regards to, or as a follow-up to your statement, Mr. Abdullah. Is there something, and Captain Laura, this may be a question for you, is there policy or procedure around what an officer is to do when running plates, when identifying suspects? Is there a policy that we could get or language that we can get surrounding those issues in our next board meeting? Thank you.
Commander Laura, you can come to this mic if you want to answer.
Thank you. Yeah, we could definitely, good evening. We could definitely get you some information on what we do, but anytime we run somebody, we should have a reason to stop them. Usually it's reasonable suspicion to even detain the person before we begin any type of investigation on them. There are other rules and laws that come into play, but what I'll do is I'll make sure that I get you something so that the next board meeting, you'll have some information regarding that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Ms. Spencer?
Thank you, Chair. Director Fisher, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what this report states, that A, he didn't have confirmation that the tags were the same, and B, he couldn't confirm who the person was in the front seat, correct?
That's correct.
And that is very concerning to me, because he basically did this action just on a whim, is what it seems like from this report. And to me, he already has like a track record of doing high category offenses. And so to me, even though he has made the statement, I'm very still concerned. This is what happened. This is from his track record for been going on for years. And so I think perhaps maybe we should consider stronger actions as well. Thank you.
Dr. Hilder?
Thank you. I think I have to do this. So Officer 1 failed to notify a supervisor before taking action, correct? Okay. My second question is, for a Category B offense, was the prior event handcuffing the individual and sitting on their stomach? Does that qualify as a prior? What I'm getting at is, have we moved to the square on our grid that would be Category B second offense? If we take that prior takedown and sitting as the first offense? No?
Yeah, we can't do that. I don't think so, Dr. Hilder, because it was a Category C. So they categorize it as a C. It's their offense, Category C. It would be, this is the first offense as a B,
Oh, because the prior offense was perhaps undercharged, is what you're telling me?
basically,
Even
yes.
though we're looking at facts that are now substantially similar. So if we're looking for a pattern, we can't establish a pattern because of a systemic, dare I say, bias previously. That's unfortunate. I just want to make sure that the public who is following along with this understands that because of that, we are not able to consider Category B second offense, where the options would be a 14 to 19-day suspension and/or demotion. Thank you.
Mr. Millener?
Thank you,
And then
Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Holloway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the observations. They were similar to observations that I made in this particular review. I did want to ask that if in fact we, for example, Mr. Chair, requested a modification, let's just say if it's language or something like that, would it have to come back to the board at the next meeting, or would it be accept and move on with the process? I wouldn't want to delay the process.
No, you can make you can make a motion for a modification, like, we had discussed, but it would not have to, we would just make that change in the report.
Okay. All right. So I would like to suggest that we strike a particular paragraph under discussion of subpart 6. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th paragraph. I printed it out on this printer. It probably doesn't have, but it says 7 of 10.
It's 8 of 10 online that I sent you.
But
Is this the one we discussed?
yes, ma'am.
All right, it would be the one that states, I can just go ahead and read it. It's right above, it's in the, what section is that? It is
Section
in-
6.
Section 6, discussion analysis. It starts with, it is not in dispute that the complainant's car did not have damage to it, nor did his 1-year-old sustain any injuries as a result of this incident.
And my issue is that it may be a little bit precipitous, and it sounds a little bit like tort language, and it may restrict an individual, even though there was admission on both parts from moving forward if they choose to, and it's also a restatement of facts that are already in evidence.
Okay.
And then secondly, on this, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know how that works. Okay, well, how about if I just put that in the form of a motion? I thought that we could handle that administratively, but okay, if I put that in
And
the
if we
form of a
can
motion.
finish the discussion before we get to the motion.
Okay,
Okay,
so
and
I
I think-
had on the same issue?
Yes.
Okay, well, I have the floor. I, like other members of this board, am concerned about what seems to be an escalating history on the part of this particular officer. And knowing that it may, take some time before it's fully adjudicated, I was wondering how onerous it would be, how reasonable it would be, both on the part of the officer as well as on our part, to recommend desk duty until such time this is fully adjudicated. I know we're all innocent until proven guilty, but there seems to be, I won't call it a pattern, but an escalation or continuation, if you will, of behavior. And I come to understand that this individual has been an officer only since 2015. So in each year of this officer's career, there have been either individual or multiple offenses, which is troubling.
Well, there is some language in the MOU that we have in regards to whether or not we want to place an officer on administrative leave. So, but it doesn't, I don't think specifically mention desk duty. I think that the board can make that recommendation. Attorney Yoon's checking that out now. Because of course, remember what we're doing is making recommendations, and it would be up to the chief to determine that. So he's checking. The MOU doesn't specifically say desk duty. It says administrative leave. It may, well, just for clarification, let us look at the language, because it may have some other caveats in there that I'm not sure what it says exactly.
Okay, if you can hold that language, and then I'll go to Mr. Holloway.
Okay, the whole incident, with the child in the car, that would bother me, and whether the child was injured or not. We don't know. The child could be affected by it later on in life. We don't know. But the idea that he would choose to police like that in that particular area of town, I'm sure he wouldn't do that in another zip code. And we don't need to sugarcoat this. We need to deal with it like it is. That child is innocent, even though he made a mistake from what, if you didn't catch the guy the day of the incident that you're involved in, you don't worry about that, because if he's a person that's gonna be involved in a lot of crimes, sooner or later he might get stopped by somebody else. You don't get out there and over-aggressively and choose the wrong person, making assumptions that he may have done this. I'm sure he did, but I got to find out. Then all of a sudden you're in a situation where you got to make a decision, and you make the wrong decision. That's what happens a lot of time. If you ain't 100%, then you need to be careful what you do.
Do you want to be recognized, Attorney Yoon? Yes, and I was going to mention that you had after this, yeah. So you can go ahead and read the written statement from the board member.
So one of the board members was not present, and pursuant to the Meetings Act, couldn't respond to all of you in advance of the meeting. I did request from the MCO staff to take the read. The rules don't prohibit it, the rules don't require it. It's an option for chair and chairs indicated it's okay. And just to be correct, if you can't make a meeting, but you want to have comments, you wouldn't have a vote, but you would still be able to be heard. Just take with a grain of salt that because he's not here, he also wouldn't be able to be persuaded. His statement is a statement of time versus what a deliberation would have been had he been here for this hearing. That being said, Board Member Joe Brown says, after review of the report, I have the following comments which may be shared at the meeting. Case 20-25, which is an incident one. I agree this is a very troubling case that demonstrates the need to build trust with police.
I'm so sorry. I am particularly troubled by the history of Officer 1. He has demonstrated a real potential for future bad conduct. There was no justification for his action in this case to block a car in and effect make a felony stop. The suspension is the minimum punishment. I would think that termination would not be out of the question given his history of similar improper conduct. And to answer the question from before, there is a section of our memorandum of understanding. It's not an exhaustive list by any means, but it is a remedy that we've named under section 13, administrative leave and alternative duty assignment, section A.
The executive director may notify the chief of police in writing with sufficient facts or information to allow the chief of police to make an informed decision that the COB has undertaken an investigation, and the director has sufficient reason to believe that a police officer's continued presence on the job may be detrimental to the department or public safety, and request that the officer be decommissioned, placed on administrative leave without pay, or placed on an alternative duty assignment pending completion of the COB's investigation. So this section was really contemplated for sort of an urgent, almost ex parte order of protection-y type remedy where we don't have all the information, we haven't completed our investigation, but it's sufficiently concerning that we want to go ahead and take some action immediately. So this is an instance where we've already done our investigation and it's before this board to make recommendations after a more fair process. So this isn't the only remedy you have other options you can make, and I think it would be even stronger given that this is the end of an investigation versus something that's being asked to do while it's being investigated. Oh, and the other thing I would mention is the second violation for obstruction, for excessive use of force, that is an open-ended category. The recommendation from the director's category B that has those limitations on a first offense between 8 and 13, if that category were to be modified based on the criteria of who was present, the severity of the injury, his prior record, you could, obviously, the range of offense and potential disciplinary action can change as well.
Thank you. Any continue, Dr. Hilder?
Thank you. To Attorney Yoon's point, though, we're not able to change the category on these facts, are we? Is it possible to go higher than category B?
Yes.
So we have the option we're going to have to take one of the 4 options. You would think I know this by now. Would we be rejecting and sending this back to be reclassified as a category A?
Okay, the categories is accept, send to MNPD Chief of Police, accept but modify, reject, or return to MNCO staff.
Okay, so if I were contemplating a motion.
Let me ask you one question.
Yeah, ma'am.
We're talking about, so there's two, we're talking about, there's two different, there's a category B for obstruction of rights, and then there's a category, excessive force can go up to category A. We're recommending a B offense. Which one are you talking about? Are you talking about the excessive force, or are you talking about the obstruction? Because the excessive use of force can be disciplined up to a category A, if that's what we were talking about. That's the one that you're interested in. The obstruction of rights is a category B offense, and we can't change that category.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. I think that I'm caught in the weeds of procedure here.
Okay.
I am extremely concerned to pick up and amplify and ratify Member Holloway's concern about the child in the car. And that we not at all be limiting in how we define injury to the child. All right? So we have a child in the car who is exposed to a traumatic incident here. And we have an acting officer with an annually escalating history of totally unacceptable behavior towards the persons of a community. And we have this happening, and I think that I'm not out of bounds here because dates and timelines are a part of this record. We have an incident that is happening in 37208, the North Precinct, less than 30 days, I think, after a traumatic national killing involving police and community with a racial inflection. So under that trifecta of circumstances, I'm feeling a strong need to sign off on something that is significantly more than a 20-day suspension. Now, however we move through this bingo card to legitimately get there, I'm fine with that. So I do want to know what's legitimate, which is why I asked about the priors. I don't know how we move there, but I need to move past 20 days. Thank you.
Attorney Yoon?
Sure, to address a couple of questions. One is, yes, the category B is static. It is a first offense, category B offense. He has no prior category Bs on his record. The previous very similar incident for which he received a written reprimand wasn't closed out as a category B, even though the fact pattern and allegation seems very, very similar. That being said, the category that is undefined, the excessive use of force, is malleable. And again, one of the factors is the severity of the offense, which is absolutely what you are talking about. So it wouldn't be just, it wouldn't be arbitrary. It wouldn't be, trying to finagle this to make it work. It would appropriately considering the factors and making a determination, in my opinion. And as to the 4 sort of actions the board can take, I think that this lives within the accept but modify. It also would be very accurate to call this a rejection, but it's just changing a conclusion, which is the recommendation really, and directing that specifically to be modified from a category B to a category A, and for the disciplinary action to go from what it is now a 10-day suspension with a cumulative 20 to a 10-day suspension for the category B or more, and a separate disciplinary action for the what would be a category A, which could be up to a demotion.
20-day suspension, the 20-day suspension first category would be 20-day suspension to dismissal and or demotion.
But you could make a motion to either, if we look at the yellow check mark, accept but modify with that modification, or reject, which is just revising that report to reflect the modification being moved to, and then also having a final resolution report this evening.
And just to reflect what's already been spoken, we had Board Member Millener, we had Board Member Brown, as well as Board Member Holloway expressed concern, and now we have Board Member Hilder. And so when you look at this grid, you see first offense, I think that any of those more than a 20-day suspension, so that would be a 20-day suspension to dismissal and or demotion are the categories.
And I do want to add Board Member Spencer also.
I'm sorry, and Board Member Spencer,
Yes.
absolutely.
So
Dr. Hilder?
I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay, can you hold that though? Because I know Mr. Millener, I wanted to recognize him back because he had some wordage that he wanted. I thought you did.
I'll try to be conscious of your concerns, Doctor. My motion would be to accept and modify PRR 2020-4.
05. 025.
Okay. Are we on 4, is it 4-5? I want to get there. 025. Okay. To accept and modify that PRR to remove the language in Section 6, Paragraph 5, and to modify Section 8, recommended action, to elevate the B category offense from category B to A, and to send that back to the executive director for a more, for an appropriate recommended action on that count that is above the current 10-day suspension recommended.
Right, and so you all would make that determination on what that is. That's what you do.
All right, so my modification would be, and that the board reconsider that particular recommendation?
No, what you all would do, deliberate here now to determine what that particular punishment would be.
Right.
Right,
Okay.
so like that would be done
Right.
collectively, whether it's 20 days, whether it's for that one offense, for that A, whether it's a 20-day, because you have to go by what this grid says. So whether either be 20-day suspension, a dismissal, and a demotion. It could be both. It could be the dismissal and and demotion, or it could just be a demotion. I mean, you all can make that collectively, or it could be all three.
So if I broke it up, Mr. Chair, it would be, first of all, the removal of the language in section 6. Okay?
And I keep looking for that section.
It starts with, on page 8, it's the second paragraph. It says, "It is not in dispute that the complainant's car did not have damage to it." It's my page 8 of 10.
Okay, I'm looking at 8 of 10 on mine here.
So it's a very small paragraph. It's the second paragraph. Oh, it's on 7 and 10 on yours.
Okay, so which paragraph is on 7 of 10?
It's 8.
Again, section 6, discipline and analysis, paragraph 5.
1.
Discussion and analysis.
Can someone read that paragraph?
Yes. It is not in dispute that the complainant's car did not have damage to it, nor did his 1-year-old sustain any injuries as a result of this incident.
Okay.
It's one.
Right, so you were saying modify that,
Remove it.
Omitted.
remove it. Okay. What's the, any more discussion on removing that paragraph? Okay, I think Mr. Holloway,
I'm in agreement with modifying it being a category A in the first offense.
but I'm saying specifically now, it's on, this paragraph. I'm saying this paragraph.
Oh, I agree with it being removed, yes.
Okay.
You have to take a vote on that.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, well, I will entertain a vote, a motion to take, to remove this paragraph.
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, it's been properly moved and second to remove this paragraph from the, resolution, report. All in favor? Let's go by, show of hands. Any opposed? Motion passed. All right, so we will remove that. What's the next item? Did you have another item? Because if not, I'm going to go to Dr. Hilder.
I yield to Dr. Hilder.
Okay.
She'd like to make that motion.
Okay. Dr. Hilder, you have the floor.
Thank you. I move that the excessive use of force, I move that we, where are the 4 options again?
Oh, the 4 options were, accept, send to the MNPD,
Right.
chief of police, accept but modify.
Accept but modify, thank you.
Accept but
So I
modify.
move that we accept but modify the findings for excessive use of force. The modification being that it is now a category A, first offense, and that the sanction be dismissal.
I second that motion.
Okay, it's been properly moved and second that this, be moved up to a category A, and it would be, dismissal. And that category, okay, I'm looking at the chart here, first offense. I'm looking at category AA,
No, category A.
20-day suspension, okay, up to dismissal, okay? So, all in favor of that motion? Okay, I will do a roll call vote. Okay, Mr. Holloway? Ms. McCree? Mr. Goddard? Mr. Whistle? Mr. Millener?
Nay.
I vote nay. Dr. Hilder?
Aye. Aye.
Mr. Abdullah? Okay, so let's see. I guess I should have.
I have
Thank you.
4 votes in favor, 3 votes nay, and 1 abstention, so the motion would pass.
Okay, All right. Okay, so the next item then is, we move to, proposed resolution CC 2021-045. And, Director Fitcher, you have the floor again.
All right, I am presenting MNCO complaint CC 2020-045. It's a citizen-referred complaint the MNCO received on August 12, 2021, related to an interaction with MMPD and the Mental Health Cooperative on August 10, 2021. On that date, the complainant reports that she had called the police asking for help and that instead of receiving help, the police harassed her and involuntarily committed her to a psychiatric hospital. Based on the complaint, we investigated a claim of harassment and obstruction of rights against the officer. We did not have jurisdiction to investigate any claims against a mental health cooperative employee. In reviewing the body-worn camera footage, interviewing the officer involved, and obtaining records such as the CAD report, we concluded that the complainant had called 911 at 3:48 p.m. and at 4:51 p.m., Officer 1 and the mental health cooperative employee arrived to speak to the complainant jointly. During Officer 1 and the mental health co-op's conversation, they both mentioned that the complainant does not appear to be a danger to herself or others, which is the criteria for involuntary committal to a psychiatric institution. It appears at the time that the mental health co-op is encouraging the police officer to initiate an arrest so that the mental health co-op employee can intervene with services. And this is based on what we saw in the video footage that was available to us. Ultimately, Officer 1 speaks to a supervisor and responds to the mental health cooperative employee that they are not going to initiate an arrest or a citation simply to trigger a mental health cooperative intervention. The mental health co-op ultimately decides to send another employee over to certify whether or not the complainant is committable and ends up doing so after approximately 3 minutes of conversation. I note that by the time the second mental health co-op employee appears at 5:48 p.m., the complainant has already gone back inside her residence, apparently to take a nap. The officer and first mental health co-op employee have to knock on her door to get the complainant back outside in order to initiate the involuntary committal interview. The allegations of harassment and obstruction of rights against Officer 1 are unsustained. The officer appears to interact in every way professionally and courteously. Both the supervisor and Officer 1 correctly note that while the situation is not ideal, it would be immoral and not okay to initiate a false arrest just to prompt mental health care for the complainant. This interaction, however, I think does display a troubling picture of the lack of available resources and alternative ways to assist those who are having mental health crises, or maybe not mental health crises, without determining what this woman was experiencing and making this rush to judgment. This is why we're here today. When people are asking for help, it is apparent that they need help. They should be able to get it. They should be offered many different opportunities for help, and they should not be exposed to handcuffs. The complainant said that the complainant stated this of her encounter. It's like I'm under arrest or something. You act like I got a warrant or something. This is not right. This is sure not right. I wish I never called you. Regardless of the best intentions of everyone involved, I think we all can agree that this is not the thoughts that we want community members to be left with after an encounter with the police and the mental health care agencies. I will note that this response, they spent almost 3 hours over at the house with this complainant. And there was multiple mental health, they had multiple mental health providers that they spoke to. And I think one of the things, and so because of this, I decided to contact the Mental Health Cooperative to speak to the director there to find out what their policies were in regards to people who I see who may have a mental health condition or may not, but may be experiencing at that moment some type of crisis and not necessarily have a diagnosis. And so I asked her what was the criteria for this type of, committals, and how do they make that determination on the spot? And what she told me was that if a person is suicidal, a harm to themselves, homicidal, a harm to others, or if they cannot care for themselves, then that is how they move forward on a committal. This complainant was not experiencing any of that. She was experiencing some other instances in trouble because she had contacted the police department multiple times that day. I'm not going to get into what she was experiencing, but what I will say is she was able to care for herself. That was, we could tell that by the video. She also had a person who was residing with her that was there as well. So she was not a harm to others, so much so that she went to take a nap. And so I was concerned about what is the process when you're dealing with people who might just be experiencing something, maybe, whatever it is, without getting into her, personal HIPAA protected information. And then I said, well, how do you follow up to determine this? And she said that what we do is we call back and we check on them to see if there is any deterioration in their behavior. It doesn't seem like that was the case here either. And this woman was committed, and she was taken to a psychiatric hospital and released the same day, a few hours later. And so that concludes oh, no, I'm sorry. Let me tell you what the decision here is. So on this, of course, because the officer, I believe, tried to do what she could do, and we can't really hold mental health cooperative employees. It's not our jurisdiction. We can't hold them accountable for this. I found that by the preponderance of evidence presented that the allegations of discourtesy and obstruction of rights against Officer 1 are not sustained. And that concludes that particular report.
And now we're to questions and comments for Dr. Pritchard. So I will recognize myself. I think this whole incident really gets into, again, the problem that we have with mental health in the city. Because in reading the report, it seems like even though you have this partnership between officers and mental health, it seems like the officers was the one that was taking the lead on this particular issue. And it seems like in this particular case, it should have been the mental health professional should have taken the lead on this rather than the other way around. So I will recognize, I think, Mr. Whistle and then Mr. Goddard. Okay, sir.
So, I know that we don't have any jurisdiction with the mental health co-op, and it seems that it was been determined that the officer did nothing wrong in this instance. However, I'm curious to know what the director said, even though she ran down the criteria and this person did not meet the criteria to be committed. So, like, what did the director say in terms of what the follow-up with that staff member would be?
So two things here. When I asked the director, because I just wanted to get an understanding on the process of the committal from their perspective. So when the first crises response person showed up, the counselor, she was not certified or qualified to make the committal. So that's why she's making the calls to other crises counselors who can make that determination. And so that's why there's this thing where they come back, and the person that comes back, assuming they have more experience or they have meet the certifications, they're the ones that make the committal. As for I didn't ask her that question specifically, but what she shared with me, some of the stuff she just couldn't share because of HIPAA protection, right? She couldn't share a lot of the conversation. She did make she did share a little bit of what was in the report, which was slightly different than what we viewed on the body-worn camera footage. There would seem to be some inaccuracies there. But ultimately, they made the committal based on, what the counselor has, observed, the fact that this person had called 911 multiple times that day. I mean, I think that there's alternatives that could have happened. Number one, you could have just told her that if you're having a non-emergency, you don't call 911, right? If in fact, if I don't know if the complainant had some assistance, and I don't know what of course, we don't have any obligation, or we shouldn't be, I don't think that we should ask her about her mental health state and, but, whatever was happening and what was experiencing while she was calling, she called and she was concerned that she wasn't receiving the help that she needed. And so based on that, those calls that she made to 911 and, her behavior, they stated, is why they had that committal done.
So just listening to the director, and she made the comment she was not certified to make that decision. And so basically what's happening is officers are being put in a position to make those decisions, even though they're not mental health experts as well. My question is there now or currently a mental health unit or a unit that go out with the police department to deal with issues and those people are able to say that, okay, this person is in need of help versus an officer who may not be trained in that? Is that currently available?
Yeah, there is a mental health co-response model, but they're usually for people who have an escalation of crises, for lack of a better term. In what I viewed on the video was a woman who was very calm, very, and was very soft-spoken about what was going on. She didn't know, she made a call just like anyone else would make a call. That is all they have now is the pilot program. It's in two areas, Hermitage or North Nashville. This didn't happen. So this happened in that area. And so, and this was the crisis response team.
Yes.
So it was the crisis response team. I thought it was just mobile crisis, but apparently it was the crisis response team that showed up to assist her.
And I might add, that's what I was saying, is that, again, the mental health professional did not take the lead, though, even though it's a co-response. It seems like it's the officer that took the lead.
I don't know why I thought that. Okay.
On that.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, Ms. Millener?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things. Number one, I'd like to request a modification, and it would be an acceptance and modification, again, in subpart 6 under discussion analysis, and that would be the last sentence in that paragraph that begins with "I do note" and ends with MNPD.
Again, can I ask which page is that and what paragraph?
I think it's my 507, but I don't know.
507, which paragraph?
Discussion analysis is labeled number 6, right? And it's
It's the first paragraph.
It's the first paragraph, and it's the last sentence in that first paragraph.
Okay.
It reads, I do note, however, that the Mental Health Cooperative is the sole agency authorized by the MNPD for mental health assessments and the existing co-partner in a pilot program, so it is possible that the MNPD could be liable under respondeat superior liability for potential wrongdoing by the Mental Health Cooperative when acting under the scope of its relationship with MNPD. I just want us to maintain an ultimate in terms of objectivity. Again, that language could be possibly looked upon as somewhat like tort language, supporting or taking away from any future action. That's the first modification that I would request.
I would like to ask if you'd like to put that in the form of a motion.
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved, properly moved and seconded that we modify paragraph under discussion, and I'm assuming it's starting where I do note, however,
Yes, Mr.
and
Chair.
on down to MNPD, that paragraph be struck from the record. Yeah, that sentence be struck from the record. Okay, it's been properly moved in second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
If I may continue,
Okay, hold on,
Go
let me
ahead.
finish the motion then.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was.
No, the motion passes. Okay, now I will recognize you.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. The second just comment that I'll make is that in reading the code as it relates to the intervention in transportation of folks who are experiencing a mental health episode, it can be quite daunting to work it all out. And in this case, the officer, by her own testimony, certainly struggled and ended up in the right place with that decision not to take the lead on that. And then it was the mental health professional who, again, by code, called Michael, who I believe was her supervisor. Okay, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be mentioning names, right? But it's in the report, right? Okay, and called her supervisor in order to get authorization to do the 404 cert. Okay, now that actually was according to Hoyle. And I think that we also have to sometimes commend proper behavior. And I really think that officer, by their testimony and struggle, behaved commendably. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Dr. Hilder.
Thank you. I'm appreciative to Member Millener for bringing out what was the proper and perhaps exemplary behavior of the officer. I too had an opportunity to view the file with staff and see a portion of the video, and I did want to make sure that in this meeting that we did give public commendation for the actions of the officers. At the same time, I remain troubled by the fact that the officers behaved properly, and I have to wonder if the mental health unit trampled on violations. And of course, there's so much medical information that we don't know and properly don't know. So I just have to wonder. But, when I was formerly in the Office of the Public Defender, we had a whole statewide unit for representing persons around involuntary commitment, et cetera. And so we have to be very careful to understand that there are all kinds of policings and there are all kinds of confinements. And just from the information that we were privileged to have access to as board members, it almost looked like this topsy-turvy where the police officers were the guardians of the civil rights of the citizen. And we have a question about what the mental health unit did. And I'm uncomfortable with that question because we as a community oversight board have no jurisdiction to wonder about, opine on, or do something with that. So I don't know where that leaves us. This may leave us at another meeting in another time to ask for a policy review or recommendation. I don't know. But as pleased as I am with the acts of the officers, this PRR concerns me. Thank you.
Okay, and doing a time check, we got about 5 minutes till 7, but Mr. Goddard, go ahead.
Very quickly following up on that,
it seemed to me each wanted the other to take the action within their authority to take care of this woman. And the officer did exactly right. There wasn't a basis to arrest or anything else. We have jurisdiction to issue recommendations to the police, and I think at another meeting, considering a strong suggestion or maybe even some specifics about having some rules and guidance and something for those two groups when the individuals are out there, how they cooperate, what is expected of each, how they make those kinds of decisions, may be something that's within our jurisdiction. Thank you.
Okay, so I
have
guess we're,
something, too.
go ahead.
I do want to mention that as I was looking over this, we looked at the not sustained, and so I would like the board to consider that this would be unfounded opposed to not sustained.
Okay. Ms. Millener?
Question about that. Is unfounded and exonerated, are they the same?
We have exoneration by policy, meaning that the facts are true, the allegations are actually true, it's just not a violation of any existing policy within MMPD. So we don't use exoneration. Unfounded is the strongest sort of language we have to say, not only are the allegations not sustainable by the evidence, we actually found enough evidence to preponderate against it. That in this case, not only was she not proven to be unprofessional or harassing, she was proven to be professional and within, guardian of the rights of the complainant. So not sustained really means we couldn't find evidence enough to preponderate one way or the other, whereas unfounded means we found enough evidence to preponderate that this did not exist.
Okay. So I guess where we're at now is we've had the discussion, so now we're entertaining a motion. And I guess that's with the modification or the amendment that Director Fisher mentioned about the. Yeah, about the conclusion. Okay, so the conclusion. No, but I'm saying, what would the conclusion read?
So the conclusion would read, the executive director finds by the preponderance of the evidence presented that the allegations of discourtesy and obstruction of rights against Officer 1 are unfounded.
Unfounded.
We approve that modification, and of course, the ones previously did voted on the modification.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we approve the conclusion for MNCO CC 2021-045. And I would like to ask for a vote, a voice vote. I'll start with Mr. Abdullah. Ms. Spencer? Dr. Hilder?
Aye.
Aye.
Arnold Hayes will say aye. Mr. Millener?
Aye.
Mr. Whistle?
Aye.
Mr. Goddard?
Aye.
Ms. McCree? Mr. Holloway? So the motion does pass. Yes, we did. We did. All right.
So I do have, with the complainant, would you give the complainant the opportunity to speak, or do an impact statement?
And I'm sorry, I got ahead of things. There was a statement from one of the board members. I do
Yes.
want that read. I'm sorry I overlooked
Right.
that.
Like, that's absolutely appropriate. So case 2145, the instant case that we just voted on, Board Member Brown states, "I agree, no violation. I would take out of the report in section 6 any reference to respondeat superior, as I think that is a legal issue and giving an opinion on it outside our jurisdiction. We need to encourage the use of mental health professionals in raising the issue that the police department might be legally responsible for a mental health employee does not help that process. Let Metro Legal sort that issue out." There was no mention of 2 officers going into the house, although earlier only 1 officer is mentioned as going into the house. I don't see a problem with an officer going into the house with her or with a quick search of the complainant for the safety of all. I'm pleased to see the officer was not willing to make an arrest just to justify a commitment. She should be commended for that action. That type of arrest would not help police relationship with the community. Let's hope the mental health program can be expanded in the future and the need for armed officers be reduced where possible. End comment. I'll just make the personal note that what a great board to think alike.
And I do want to thank Judge Brown for his, commenting, even though he was going to be out today. I do appreciate that. And now recognize again, Director Fisher, you were finished.
The complainant called today. She had tried to get in touch with us multiple times. She stated that she would not be able to make the meeting because she could not find a ride. She asked that this message be read at the meeting. MDHA, Mental Health Co-op, and MMPD discriminated against me. I asked for help and was told by them that I needed mental health assistance, which I do not need. I was laughed at and lied on. I stayed at the hospital for 4 hours and was released the same day. My son and his child's mother picked me up. My daughter and family are very upset about this and very frustrated. This should not have happened to me. That's the end of that.
We thankful for the comments. Okay, now the next item on the agenda is public comment. I do want to say that, we always appreciate public comments. I mean, we are a community organization, and we definitely want input from the community. So if there's any public comments.
We have one.
We have one?
We recognize Mr.
Okay. This guy seems familiar. I think he's been here before.
Yes, maybe a time or two.
Okay, and turn your speaker on there. Down at the bottom. Yeah, right there.
Good evening, everyone. Just three things. First, I'm David Tucker. I'm the president of the IMF, of which most of you are aware. As the COB begins to become settled into the civic apparatus, every now and then I think you all have to be reminded of what even got you here. It was 60,000 plus votes of Nashvillians who thought this was necessary. And the two reports tonight are of concern, but also the incident out on I-65. If you watched it and you listened to it and you count after the ceasefire, there's a couple shots in the whole melee as the person is hollering ceasefire. Then there's silence. Then there's two shots ring out into a body that is laying face down on the side of the interstate. The department has fired the person, I guess, at this point, in their circling of the wagons after every incident. But this is deeper than that. I believe this needs to be referred to the district attorney, a grand jury, or someone. This is criminal. The police have already made their mind up on what they're going to do about it. But this, to me, is a criminal act. There was no reason for that individual to fire those two rounds, and particularly from a high-powered rifle into an unmoving body on the side of the interstate. Number two, in this first one, this 2020, y'all actually encouraged me, because when I read it, that's why I came, 20 days was too much of a compromise. This individual does not need to be on the police department. The OPA, if you see how far different you are on your own analysis of it, the OPA, 2 days, in spite of reading the record. Okay, 20 days, that's 10 times greater, but this individual's gonna do something else. And when this individual does something else, and it came through you, whether or not Chief Drake agrees with you terminating the person or not, at least your conscience can be clean. I don't think Nashville needs nor desires this type of officer who we may run into at any given time. This individual was leaving church with his child, with a guy who obviously has a bunch of problems. So I was encouraged that at least 4 of you voted for this person's termination. But when the chief gets this, you all are split, so the person's gonna keep their job. So remember the name, because this person will come back around. Thirdly, this last issue, I think you all missed the point. The community has been screaming for years for the decriminalization of mental health issues. This arrangement with Mental Health Co-op in this report shows that there are still problems that individuals like NOAA, IMF, and others, the NAACP, have been working toward a proper resolution. I read the report. It is the mental health person who is encouraging the officer to arrest the person. We're trying to decriminalize this. And so the help that the system has gone to get seems to be attempting to perpetuate what the problem is. Now, I heard you. You have no purview in this, but you do have this report that does show this. What can you do to bring this to light? If it had not been for the officer who actually said, this is not right. And I've said on record here before, I am glad when you exonerate or show that officers have not done wrong, so that it gives some level of confidence to the community that this is not the hatchet commission, that you all are taking out of your own personal lives and time to diligently try to address situations that have to do with public safety in Nashville. So here's an issue. The MHC wants the person arrested so they can get help. That has been the policing philosophy here for the last 30, 40 years. And so, yes, I think this officer does need to be singled out, but it concerns me again about what we've been arguing ongoing about the current processes, even with MHC. There are other programs that I think Nashville has gotten to the point that we're going to need to try these, because right now I'm concerned that Mental Health Co-op, who's supposed to be acting on the health side of the public safety issue, is encouraging the officer to arrest the person. And those are my comments. Again, I am grateful that for the effort and the work. I'm impressed with Judge Brown, who's going to be off, going to send in his comments. And I wish more of Nashville could actually see the diligence that you all put in to doing this job, that you all make tough calls, you give of your time, and y'all actually read the reports. I'm impressed, because some of us are reading them too. And so again, I just thank you for your service to the city and toward making this a more equitable and just place. Thank you.
Public comments? I do want to say, as the chair, that's what I do like about this board, is that we do struggle to actually make sure we're making the correct decision. And I think that's why we do have this board, because we're going to have different views. But each of us have to feel that we're making the right decision. So that's the beauty of this board. And so now we're to the point of adjournment. I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. I'm sorry. Did I miss something else? Okay. New business and announcements.
So new business, I kind of mentioned it, we will have a new administrative assistant starting on Monday, the 28th, which will be a super help. And then the other announcement I mentioned was Dr. Valier, his last day is March the 1st. So if any of you want to join us for lunch, we're going to be having lunch on March the 1st. You can come out and help us. But I wanted to give him an opportunity to speak. And thank him for the diligent work that he's done to help this board and the staff.
I just wanted to thank the board, as well as Director Fitcher. I've been working for the board for over 2.5 years. I was the first researcher hired by the board, but I also was working in research in Nashville in policing beforehand. So I've coming up on 6 years of researching the police department, researching racial justice in Nashville, researching how the police contribute to inequality. And it's been an incredibly rewarding journey. I'm really proud of the work that this board does. I'm proud of the work that the staff has done to build a system and a process for creating policy reports, for creating recommendations, and creating investigative findings. And I'm really proud of that work. In my next step, I'll be working as Director of Analytics for Albuquerque Police Department. Albuquerque Police has a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice for unconstitutional use of force. I'll be taking what I've learned here on accountability and democratic policing, which is the work of this board, and in order to create a more transparent police department. I've been really proud to work for the people of Nashville, and I'm going to try to serve the people of Albuquerque the same. So I just want to thank everybody and thank you for your service. And I've been really proud to serve you all and serve the community.
Thank you, thank you.
And I do want to just add that I do appreciate Dr. Valier. And again, with the whole concept of this board and to see all of the professionalisms with all of the reporting and everything and the excellent research. And I'm so glad that Mr. Crowell Williamson, that he's gotten a chance to actually work with you some on that. So, but congratulations and best wishes. So, all right. So now, are we to adjourn? I will entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I move.
Okay?
I second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. The time is 7:10 PM. This meeting is adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.